3 weeks after the accident that left me paralyzed from the waist down, my husband Owen walked out, claiming he couldn't handle my condition. But what he didn't know was that I'd been recording every conversation he thought I couldn't hear, and his lawyer Graham was about to learn just how devastating my evidence really was. The antiseptic smell of the rehabilitation center still makes my stomach turn, even now, 6 months later. But it's not the medical odors that haunt me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It's the memory of lying in that adjustable bed, watching the man I'd loved for 12 years pack his belongings while explaining to his sister Carrie why he simply couldn't stay married to half a woman. My name is Pippa Richardson, and until that rainy Tuesday in March, I thought I knew exactly who I was. A successful marketing executive, a devoted wife, a woman who had everything figured out. The accident changed more than just my ability to walk. It revealed truths that shattered every assumption I'd built my life on. The collision itself is still a blur of twisted metal and searing pain. What I remember clearly is waking up in the ICU 3 days later, Owen's hand clasped around mine, tears streaming down his face as he whispered promises about facing this together. In sickness and in health, he kept repeating, kissing my forehead with what I believed was genuine devotion. The first red flag came disguised as thoughtfulness. While I was still processing the doctor's gentle but devastating news about my spinal cord injury, Owen had already begun making decisions. He'd taken leave from his law firm, he explained, to focus entirely on my care. He'd spoken with our insurance company about modifications to our house. He'd even researched the best rehabilitation facilities in the state. "You don't need to worry about anything," he assured me during those first terrible weeks. "I'm handling everything." At the time, his efficiency felt like love. Now I understand it was something much more calculated. The accident happened on March 15th. By April 3rd, I was transferred to Riverside Rehabilitation Center, a sprawling facility that specialized in spinal cord injuries. The building tried hard to feel welcoming. Lots of natural light, motivational posters, cheerful staff, but it couldn't mask what it really was. A place where people learned to rebuild their lives from the ground up. My room was on the 2nd floor, with a view of the parking lot where I could watch visitors come and go. Owen's visits followed a pattern I began to notice. Always during lunch hours, never staying more than 45 minutes, always checking his phone with increasing frequency as the visits progressed. It was my roommate, an elderly woman named Shelby who'd been there for months recovering from a stroke, who first made me pay attention to things I'd been too medicated and traumatized to notice. "Honey," she said one afternoon after Owen had left, "I've been watching that husband of yours and something ain't sitting right with me." Shelby had been a detective for 30 years before retirement, and even at 72, her instincts were sharp. She'd noticed things I'd missed. How Owen positioned himself near the door during visits. How he asked detailed questions about my prognosis that seemed more clinical than concerned. How he'd grown increasingly interested in my insurance coverage and disability benefits. "Start paying attention," she advised, her voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes the people closest to us show their true colors when we're at our most vulnerable." I didn't want to believe her. Even as I began to notice the signs myself. The way Owen's eyes darted around the room when he thought I wasn't looking. The hushed phone conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached in my wheelchair. The gradual decrease in physical affection. I told myself it was just the stress of our new reality. The turning point came on a Thursday evening in late April. I'd been practicing transfers in the physical therapy room when I realized I'd left my water bottle in my room. As I wheeled back down the hallway, I heard familiar voices coming from the family consultation room. Owen's voice and another man's that I recognized as Graham Thorne, our family lawyer and Owen's longtime friend. The door was slightly ajar and their voices carried clearly into the hallway. What I heard made my blood run cold. "The insurance settlement could be substantial," Graham was saying, his tone businesslike. "Especially if we can prove negligence on the part of the construction company. But we need to consider the long-term implications." "That's what I'm trying to tell you," Owen replied, frustration evident in his voice. "I can't do this, Graham. I never signed up for this. She's going to need care for the rest of her life, and I just can't be that person. You understand what you're saying, right? If you file for divorce now, while she's still in rehabilitation, the optics are going to be terrible. People will crucify you. Owen's laugh was bitter and cold. People can think whatever they want. I'm 38 years old, Graham. I'm not throwing away the rest of my life playing nursemaid to someone who can't even. He stopped himself, but the implication hung in the air like poison. What about the insurance money? Graham pressed. If you divorce her, she gets the settlement, not you. That's why we need to move fast on the personal injury suit, Owen said. File everything while we're still married. Then once the settlement comes through. I sat frozen in my wheelchair, processing what I was hearing. They were discussing my life, my future, my financial security like I was a business transaction to be optimized. Graham's next words confirmed my worst fears. I can draw up the divorce papers, but Owen, you need to be smart about this. Document everything. Her emotional state, her dependency issues, anything that might help in custody or financial negotiations later. She'll probably fight it, Owen said. Let her. By the time this is all sorted out, you'll have the settlement money, and she'll be dealing with legal fees she can't afford. Just be careful how you handle the separation. We don't want anything that looks like abandonment. The irony of that last statement would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. I wheeled myself back to my room, my mind racing. For the first time since the accident, I felt something other than despair or self-pity. I felt fury, and with that fury came clarity. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If Owen thought he could manipulate my vulnerability for his financial gain, he was about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating a woman who had nothing left to lose. I may have lost the use of my legs in that accident, but my mind was sharper than ever, and I was about to put it to very good use. P.S. Tough. The next morning brought Owen's usual performance of devoted husband, complete with coffee from my favorite cafe and fresh flowers for my bedside table. Watching him arrange the daisies with such careful attention to detail, I marveled at how convincing his act was. 12 years of marriage, and I'd never suspected he was capable of such calculated deception. You look tired, sweetheart, he said, settling into the visitor's chair with practiced ease. Did you sleep okay? I studied his face, the concerned furrow of his brow, the gentle tone, the way he leaned forward, as if hanging on my every word. Oscar-worthy, really. Just thinking about everything, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. About us, about the future. Something flickered in his eyes, too quick to identify, but his smile never wavered. We're gonna get through this together, Pip. One day at a time. The nickname he'd called me since our college days now felt like acid on my tongue. How long had he been planning this? How many of those tender moments over the years had been genuine, and how many had been investments in a future payout? After he left for his important meeting at the firm, Shelby wheeled herself over to my bed, her expression grave. You heard something last night, didn't you? I nodded, then told her everything. Shelby listened without interruption, her cop instincts processing every detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Honey, we need to talk about your situation before this accident, she said finally. Help me understand what you're really dealing with here. The backstory unfolded like a financial thriller I never realized I was living. Owen and I had met during our senior year at Northwestern University. He was studying law, I was finishing my marketing degree, and what started as a study group partnership evolved into something deeper. We were married 2 years after graduation, building what everyone said was the perfect partnership. I'd thrown myself into my career at Morrison & Associates, one of Chicago's premier marketing firms. Within 8 years, I'd worked my way up to senior vice president, managing accounts worth millions. My salary had grown to $180,000 annually, with substantial bonuses tied to client retention and new business development. Owen had taken a different path. After graduating from law school, he'd joined a small firm specializing in personal injury law. His career had been solid but unremarkable. Steady income, middle-tier cases, nothing spectacular. What I hadn't realized until now was how much that disparity in our financial success had apparently bothered him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The house. Shelby prompted gently. Tell me about your assets. Our house in Lincoln Park was worth $850,000, purchased 5 years ago when my career really took off. I'd made the down payment from my savings, though both our names were on the mortgage. We had joint checking and savings accounts, but I'd also maintained separate investment accounts that Owen had shown little interest in managing. Then there was my 401k, worth nearly $400,000, and the stock options from Morrison & Associates that had vested over the years. The life insurance policy through my company was substantial, $500,000, with Owen as the beneficiary. What about the accident itself? Shelby asked. Tell me exactly what happened. The details came back in fragments. I'd been driving home from a client dinner, taking Lakeshore Drive like I had hundreds of times before. It was raining, but not heavily. I remembered stopping at a red light near the construction zone, where they were expanding the bridge overpass. The impact came from behind, a delivery truck whose driver claimed his brakes failed. The force sent my BMW spinning into the concrete barrier. The truck driver, a man named Stanley Walsh, had been working 16-hour shifts for a company with a history of maintenance violations. And Owen handled all the insurance communications? Shelby's question was sharp, focused. I nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. He said I shouldn't worry about the details while I was recovering. He coordinated with our auto insurance, my health insurance, even filed the preliminary paperwork for the personal injury claim. Sweetheart, Shelby said gently, you need to understand something. In personal injury cases like yours, especially with clear negligence from the trucking company, settlements can reach 7 figures. Maybe more. The room felt suddenly cold, despite the afternoon sunshine streaming through the windows. 7 figures. Life-changing money that Owen was positioning himself to control while simultaneously planning to abandon me. There's something else, I admitted, remembering a conversation from 2 weeks before the accident. Owen had been asking about updating our wills. He said with my job becoming more demanding, we should make sure everything was properly documented. Shelby's expression darkened. Did you sign anything? New wills, yes. And I think, yes, I gave him power of attorney for medical decisions. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Shelby, if something had happened to me in that accident, he would have controlled everything, she finished grimly. The settlement, your assets, your medical care decisions. Everything. The afternoon visiting hours brought a parade of friends and colleagues, each one commenting on what a devoted husband Owen was, how lucky I was to have someone so dedicated. Karen Miller from my office brought flowers and gossip from work, carefully avoiding any mention of whether my position would still exist when I was ready to return. Owen's been so involved, Karen said, arranging the roses she'd brought. He calls the office almost daily for updates on your benefits, asking about the timeline for your return. Such a caring husband. After she left, I sat in my wheelchair staring out at the parking lot, watching Owen's black Mercedes pull up for his evening visit. 35 minutes today, I noted. Right on schedule. The physical therapy session that morning had gone well. My upper body strength was improving daily, and I was becoming more adept with transfers and wheelchair navigation. The doctors were optimistic about my adaptation progress, but they'd been clear about the permanence of my condition. The damage to my spinal cord was complete. I would never walk again. That evening, after Owen's performance of devoted concern, I made my first real decision. I called the nurse's station and asked to speak with the patient advocate about my rights regarding medical records and insurance communications. It was time to stop being the victim of Owen's carefully orchestrated plan and start building a case of my own. If he thought my disability made me helpless, he was about to discover just how wrong he was. The accident had taken my legs, but it had also opened my eyes. And what I was seeing was going to cost Owen far more than he ever imagined gaining. The patient advocate, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, who'd clearly dealt with complicated family dynamics before, arrived at my room the next morning with a folder full of forms and a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put me at ease. Mrs. Richardson, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed, you have absolute rights regarding your medical information and insurance communications. No one, not even your spouse, can access these without your explicit written consent. The relief I felt was overwhelming. My husband has been handling everything since the accident. I assumed he had the authority. Patricia's expression grew carefully neutral, the kind of professional mask that suggested she'd seen this situation before. Medical power of attorney only applies when you're unable to make decisions for yourself. You've been competent and alert since your transfer here. Any communications he's had with insurance companies or medical staff on your behalf would have required your consent. My heart started racing as the implications sank in. But I never signed anything giving him that authority. Not since I've been here. Then we have a problem, Patricia said quietly. Because according to our records, someone has been calling regularly, identifying himself as your designated representative. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Owen hadn't just been planning to abandon me, he'd been actively committing fraud, using my incapacitation as cover to access information and potentially make decisions I never authorized. Patricia pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes as I explained everything I'd overheard between Owen and Graham. Her expression grew more concerned with each detail. Mrs. Richardson, what you're describing could constitute insurance fraud, among other things. But we need to be very careful how we proceed. If your husband is indeed planning to file for divorce, any evidence of wrongdoing on his part could be crucial for your protection. That afternoon, I implemented my first test. When Owen arrived for his usual visit, I was ready. "Honey," I said, keeping my tone casual, "I've been thinking about the insurance situation. I'd like to speak directly with the adjuster handling our case." Owen's reaction was subtle but telling. A brief pause in unwrapping the sandwich he'd brought, a slight tightening around his eyes, before the concerned husband mask slipped back into place. "Pip, you don't need to worry about those details right now. I've got everything under control. The adjuster said it's better if I handle the communications since you're still in recovery." "I'm sure he did," I replied, watching his face carefully. "But I'd still like to speak with him myself. What's his name again?" Another pause. Steve Stevens from Midwest Mutual." The lie was so clumsy I almost laughed. Our insurance was through Farmers, and I knew it because I'd been the one to set up our policy when we bought the house. But I kept my expression neutral, filing away this confirmation of his deception. "Could you give me his direct number?" "I promise I won't complicate anything you've already discussed." Owen's smile grew strained. "Let me check on the best way to reach him and get back to you, okay? I want to make sure we don't confuse any of the ongoing negotiations." After he left, I called Patricia immediately. Within an hour, she'd confirmed what I already suspected. Our actual insurance company had no record of any Steve Stevens, and all communications regarding my case had been handled directly between Owen and adjusters I'd never spoken to. The next revelation came that evening during what should have been a routine physical therapy session. My therapist, a young man named Derek who'd been working with me since my arrival, made an offhand comment that stopped me cold. "Your husband mentioned you've been having some memory issues," Derek said while helping me with transfer exercises. He asked us to keep track of any confusion or difficulty following instructions. I carefully maintained my balance on the parallel bars, processing this new information. "Memory issues?" "Yeah," he said, "the trauma from the accident might have affected your cognitive function. Asked us to document any incidents for the insurance company." The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Owen wasn't just positioning himself to control my settlement. He was building a case for my incompetence, creating a paper trail that would support any future claims that I wasn't capable of managing my own affairs. "Have you noticed any memory problems?" I asked Derek directly. Hello, she looked confused. "No, actually. You've been one of our sharpest patients. Your recall is excellent, and you follow complex instructions without any issues. That's why I was surprised when he brought it up." That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through the implications of what I'd learned. Owen wasn't just planning to abandon me. He was actively working to undermine my credibility and legal standing. The memory issues claim was probably just the beginning. I thought about the power of attorney documents I'd signed before the accident. Had there been clauses I hadn't read carefully? Provisions that would give Owen control if I were deemed mentally incompetent? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. a woman I didn't recognize, who introduced herself as Carrie Thornton, Owen's sister. I'd met Carrie a handful of times over the years, mostly at family gatherings, where she'd been polite but distant. "Pippa," she said, settling into the visitor's chair with obvious discomfort. "I wanted to see how you were doing. Owen's been so worried." There was something in her tone that suggested this wasn't a social call. I decided to take a risk. "It's been difficult," I said carefully. "I'm trying to understand all the insurance and legal implications of everything. It's overwhelming." Carrie nodded sympathetically, then hesitated before speaking again. "Owen mentioned that you've been having some trouble processing things since the accident." There it was. Owen was spreading his story beyond the medical staff, building a broader narrative of my supposed cognitive decline. But Carrie's uncomfortable demeanor suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by her brother's claims. "What exactly did he tell you?" I asked directly. Carrie looked genuinely troubled. "He said the head trauma from the accident affected your memory and judgment, that you've been making unrealistic demands about the insurance settlement, not understanding how these things work." I leaned forward in my wheelchair, meeting her eyes directly. "Carrie, I need you to listen to me carefully. I never had any head trauma. My injuries were entirely spinal. My cognitive function is completely normal. You can verify that with any of the medical staff here." The color drained from Carrie's face as she processed what I was saying. "But Owen said—" "Owen is lying," I said quietly, "and I think you know it, or you wouldn't be here trying to assess my mental state for yourself." Carrie sat in stunned silence for several minutes before finally speaking. "Pippa, if what you're saying is true, why would Owen lie about something like that?" I decided to trust my instinct about her discomfort with her brother's story. "Because he's planning to divorce me as soon as the insurance settlement comes through, and he needs documentation that I'm not competent to manage my own affairs." The expression on Carrie's face told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't surprised by the divorce plan. She was surprised that I knew about it. "How long have you known?" I asked quietly. Carrie's voice was barely a whisper. "He told me last week. Said he couldn't handle being married to someone who would never be whole again. But he made me promise not to say anything until after." "After the settlement comes through?" She nodded miserably. "Pippa, I'm so sorry. I hoped he would change his mind." That night, after Carrie left with promises to stay in touch despite whatever happened with Owen, I finally had confirmation of what I'd suspected. This wasn't a spontaneous decision born from the stress of my accident. It was a calculated plan that had been in motion for at least a week, possibly longer. But Owen had made a crucial mistake. He'd involved his sister in his deception, and Carrie's conscience was clearly bothering her. I now had my first potential witness to his premeditation. Jakayali wo liei shaks. The student was about to become the teacher, and class was about to begin. Afi Jakayali. 3 days after Carrie's revealing visit, Graham Thorne appeared at my bedside with a stack of legal documents, and what I was beginning to recognize as the family's signature fake smile. He'd always made me uncomfortable during our social interactions over the years, too smooth, too calculating, but now I understood why. "Pippa," he said, settling into the chair with practiced ease, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. Owen asked me to review some of the insurance paperwork with you." I kept my expression neutral despite my racing pulse. "Of course, Graham. Though I have to admit, I'm a little confused about some of the things Owen's been telling me." Graham's pen paused over the documents. "Confused how?" "Well," I said carefully, "he mentioned an adjuster named Steve Stevens from Midwest Mutual, but when I tried to look up our policy information, I couldn't find any record of that company handling our case." The silence that followed was telling. Graham's lawyer training kicked in quickly, but not before I caught the flash of concern in his eyes. "Insurance cases can be complex," he said finally. "Sometimes there are multiple companies involved, primary carriers, umbrella policies, the trucking company's insurance. Owen's been managing the communications to keep things streamlined." "I'm sure he has," I replied, "but as the actual policyholder, I'd like to speak directly with our real insurance company." "Farmers, isn't it?" Graham's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Pippa, I think the medication and stress might be affecting your memory a bit. We've discussed this. Owen has power of attorney to handle these matters while you recover. Another lie. I'd never signed any such document since the accident. And the medical power of attorney from before only covered emergency medical decisions, not insurance negotiations. Could you show me that document? I asked sweetly. I'd like to review exactly what authority I granted. Graham shuffled through his papers with increasing agitation. I don't have it with me, but I can have Owen bring it by tomorrow. That would be wonderful, I said, knowing no such document existed. After Graham left, promising to return with the mysterious power of attorney paperwork, I made my second crucial phone call. This time, I contacted Farmers Insurance directly, identifying myself as the policyholder and requesting information about my claim. What I learned made my blood run cold. The adjuster, a woman named Ms. Rodriguez, was surprised to hear from me. Mrs. Richardson, we've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your husband has been very clear that you're not well enough to participate in the claim process, but we really need your direct input on several matters. What kind of matters? Well, the settlement offer from the trucking company's insurance, for one. It's substantial, $1.2 million, but it requires your signature. Your husband has been resistant to having you review the terms. My hands shook as I gripped the phone. Owen had been blocking my access to a settlement offer worth over $1 million, all while planning to divorce me once he could gain control of the money. Ms. Rodriguez, I need you to understand something very clearly. I never authorized my husband to negotiate on my behalf. I've been fully competent since my accident, and I want to review all settlement offers personally. The pause on the other end was pregnant with implications. Mrs. Richardson, if that's the case, we may have a serious problem. Your husband has been representing himself as your legal proxy for weeks. That evening, Owen's visit carried a different energy. He seemed agitated, checking his phone more frequently than usual and cutting his visit short after only 20 minutes. Is everything okay? I asked innocently. Just work stress, he said, but his smile was strained. Graham mentioned he stopped by today. Did you sign those insurance forms he brought? He said he needed to bring me the power of attorney document first, I replied, watching his reaction carefully. Owen's face went through a series of micro-expressions: confusion, alarm, then forced calm. Right, yes, I'll make sure he has everything in order. After he left, Shelby wheeled over to my bed, her expression grim. Honey, they're panicking. When people start making mistakes this obvious, it means they're running scared. She was right. The next morning brought a flurry of activity that confirmed just how rattled Owen and Graham had become. First, Owen called to say he'd be visiting later than usual due to, quote, urgent legal business. Then Graham's office called to reschedule our follow-up meeting, citing document preparation delays. But the most revealing development came from an unexpected source. Andrew Lawson, a junior associate from Graham's firm, arrived at my room that afternoon looking nervous and uncomfortable. Mrs. Richardson, he said, glancing around as if expecting to be overheard. I'm working on your case file, and I have some concerns about the documentation. I invited him to sit, sensing an opportunity. Andrew was young, probably fresh out of law school, and clearly struggling with something. What kind of concerns? I asked gently. The power of attorney documents, he said quietly. The ones Mr. Thorne said you signed. I can't find them in the file. And when I asked about getting copies from your husband, Mr. Thorne told me to stop asking questions and just prepare the settlement paperwork. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. Andrew, what would happen if those power of attorney documents don't actually exist? His face went pale. If Mr. Richardson has been negotiating without proper authorization, that could be insurance fraud. And if Mr. Thorne has been facilitating it. He trailed off, clearly understanding the implications. What do you think you should do? I asked carefully. Andrew was quiet for a long moment before answering. I think I need to speak with the Bar Association's ethics hotline. After he left, I sat in my wheelchair processing this new development. Owen's scheme was unraveling faster than he could control it. His lies were catching up with him, his co-conspirators were making mistakes, and now he had a potential whistleblower within his own lawyer's firm. But I knew this was when he would become most dangerous. Desperate people make desperate choices, and Owen still had cards to play. The fake mental incompetency claims, the insurance money he thought he could still access, the divorce proceedings he was undoubtedly preparing to file. However, he'd made one critical miscalculation. He thought my physical disability made me helpless. What he failed to understand was that my legs had never been the source of my strength. My mind was sharper than ever, and I was about to show him exactly what a truly dangerous woman could accomplish from a wheelchair. The sleepless night that followed Andrew's visit gave me time to piece together a timeline that made my stomach churn. Lying in the dark, I forced myself to examine our marriage through the lens of what I now knew, and the picture that emerged was devastating. The first red flag I'd missed came flooding back. Owen's sudden interest in my work schedule 3 months before the accident. He'd started asking detailed questions about my client meetings, my travel plans, even which routes I typically took driving home from downtown. At the time, I'd been flattered by his attention, thinking he was trying to be more involved in my career. Now I realized he'd been conducting surveillance, learning my patterns, identifying opportunities. The construction project on Lakeshore Drive had been ongoing for 6 months, creating dangerous conditions during evening rush hour. Owen, with his personal injury law background, would have known exactly which intersections posed the highest risk for serious accidents. The timing of my crash, 7:30 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, in the exact location where 3 other accidents had occurred in the previous month, suddenly seemed far less coincidental. But the most chilling revelation came when I remembered a conversation from 2 weeks before the accident. Owen had been unusually affectionate that evening, bringing me flowers and suggesting we update our life insurance policies. "You're so successful now, Pip," he'd said, running his fingers through my hair. "We should make sure our coverage reflects our current situation, and maybe increase the disability benefits, just in case." I'd been touched by his thoughtfulness. We'd contacted our insurance agent the next day and doubled my disability coverage to $8,000 monthly for life. The policy would only pay out for permanent disabilities. Temporary injuries wouldn't qualify. Owen had been planning for my paralysis before it happened. The morning brought another piece of the puzzle when Karen Miller called from my office. Her voice was strained, careful in a way that immediately put me on alert. "Pippa, I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I've been having some strange conversations with Owen about your situation." "What kind of conversations?" "He's been asking very specific questions about your work capabilities. Whether someone with your condition could realistically continue in a senior executive role. He even suggested that the company might want to consider restructuring your position to something more suitable." My grip tightened on the phone. Owen was systematically undermining my career prospects, probably hoping to force me into early retirement or resignation. With no job and mounting medical expenses, I'd be financially dependent on whatever settlement he could manipulate. "Karen, I need you to document every conversation you've had with Owen. Dates, times, exactly what was said." "Already done," she replied grimly. Something felt off about the whole thing. "Pippa, there's something else. He asked about your stock options and when they vest. Very detailed questions about the company's disability policies and whether unvested options would be forfeited if you couldn't return to work." Another piece clicked into place. My stock options were worth nearly $300,000 and would vest over the next 2 years, but only if I remained employed. Owen was trying to force a situation where I'd lose that money entirely. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my oldest friend, Shelby Martinez, not my roommate, but my college roommate, who now worked as a private investigator in Denver. We'd stayed close over the years, and she'd always had an uncanny ability to see through people's facades. "Pippa." Shelby's voice was warm with concern. "I've been thinking about you constantly since Owen told me about the accident. How are you really doing?" "Shelby, I need to ask you something important. When did Owen call you about my accident?" "Let me think. It was the day after, I believe. Wednesday morning. He was so devastated. Could barely get the words out about your injuries." My blood ran cold. The accident had happened on Tuesday evening. Owen had called Shelby Wednesday morning. But I hadn't been diagnosed with permanent paralysis until Thursday afternoon, after the swelling in my spinal cord had been given time to resolve, and the full extent of the damage could be assessed. How had Owen known to tell people I'd never walk again before the doctors had even confirmed it? "Shelby," I said carefully, "What exactly did Owen tell you about my injuries?" "He said you'd been paralyzed from the waist down, that the doctors said it was permanent. He was talking about wheelchair accessibility and long-term care needs." "Why?" "Because he'd known the extent of my injuries before they were medically confirmed. The only way that was possible was if he'd known what kind of accident was going to happen." "Shelby, I need your help. Professional help. And I need you to keep this conversation completely confidential." I spent the next hour explaining everything I'd discovered. Shelby listened without interruption, her investigator instincts processing each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Pippa, what you're describing sounds like attempted murder disguised as an accident. The level of premeditation, the financial motives, the systematic undermining of your credibility. This isn't just divorce fraud. This is something much more serious. Can you help me prove it?" "I'm already booking a flight to Chicago," she said. "But Pippa, you need to understand something. If Owen realizes you're investigating him, he might accelerate his timeline. Right now, he thinks he's in control. If that changes—" She didn't need to finish the thought. A man who would orchestrate one accident to gain control of insurance money might not hesitate to arrange another to silence the only witness to his crimes. That evening, Owen's visit carried a different energy than usual. He seemed distracted, agitated, checking his phone constantly and cutting his visit short after only 15 minutes. "Everything okay?" I asked innocently. "Just some complications with the insurance paperwork," he said, but his smile was strained. "Nothing for you to worry about." After he left, I sat in the gathering darkness of my room, processing the full scope of what I'd uncovered. Owen hadn't just been planning to abandon me. He'd orchestrated my paralysis, manipulated my medical care, committed insurance fraud, and was systematically destroying my financial independence. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman he'd been married to for 12 years. I'd built a successful career by being thorough, strategic, and relentless in pursuing my goals. Now I had a new goal: making sure Owen Richardson learned exactly what those qualities could accomplish when they were focused on bringing him down. The next morning, I began what I privately called Operation Documentation. If Owen thought he could outmaneuver me while I was physically vulnerable, he was about to learn that 12 years of marriage had taught me more about his methods than he realized. First, I requested a meeting with the Rehabilitation Center's patient rights coordinator, a stern woman named Ms. Patterson, who dealt with enough family manipulation to recognize the signs immediately. I explained my situation carefully, focusing on the unauthorized insurance communications and the false claims about my mental competency. "Mrs. Richardson," she said after reviewing my medical file, "I want you to understand your rights very clearly. You have the absolute authority to designate who can access your medical information. If your husband has been representing himself as your proxy without proper documentation, that's a serious violation." Within an hour, she'd helped me file official notifications with every department in the hospital, revoking any implied consent for Owen to receive information about my condition or treatment. From now on, every conversation would require my direct approval and presence. The real work began that afternoon, when my friend Shelby Martinez arrived from Denver. Seeing her walk into my room felt like watching the cavalry arrive, professional, determined, and carrying a briefcase full of tools I was going to need. "Okay," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed and pulling out a digital recorder. "Let's start from the beginning. I want every detail, no matter how small it seems." For the next 3 hours, we constructed a timeline that revealed the true scope of Owen's planning. Shelby's investigative background helped me identify patterns I'd missed, how Owen's questions about my work schedule had intensified in the weeks before the accident, how he'd started arriving home later from the office, claiming to work on complex cases that he'd never discussed before. "The truck driver," Shelby said, consulting her notes. "Stanley Walsh. Tell me about him." I realized I knew almost nothing about the man whose brake failure had changed my life. Owen had handled all communication with the police and insurance companies, claiming he wanted to protect me from the traumatic details. "That's our first real lead," Shelby said, making a note. "Brake failures don't just happen, especially not with the precision timing your husband would have needed. If this was orchestrated, there will be evidence." While Shelby began her investigation into Stanley Walsh and the trucking company, I focused on documenting Owen's recent behavior. Every conversation, every visit, every inconsistency in his stories was carefully recorded in a journal that I kept hidden in my bedside table. The pattern that emerged was chilling in its calculated precision. Owen's visits followed a rigid schedule designed to maintain his devoted husband image while minimizing actual contact time. He arrived during lunch hours when fewer staff members were around to observe our interactions. He brought small gifts, flowers, coffee, magazines, that created the appearance of thoughtfulness without requiring significant emotional investment. Most tellingly, he'd been asking increasingly specific questions about my discharge timeline and home care requirements, not because he was planning to provide that care, but because he was calculating when he could safely abandon me without facing criticism for leaving a wife who was still hospitalized. That evening brought an unexpected revelation when Derek, my physical therapist, mentioned something during our session that made my blood run cold. "Your husband asked about your pain medication schedule," Derek said casually while adjusting the parallel bars. "Wanted to know about dosages and timing. Said he was concerned about managing your medication when you go home." I kept my expression neutral while my mind raced. Owen had no intention of managing my care at home. He was planning to leave me. So why was he asking about my pain medication? The answer hit me like a physical blow. He was gathering information about my prescription schedule, my medication tolerances, my daily routines. If I had an accidental overdose or medical complication after discharge, it would seem like a tragic consequence of my condition, not foul play. Owen wasn't just planning to abandon me. He was keeping his options open for something much worse. That night, I called Shelby with this new information. Her response was immediate and alarming. "Pippa, we need to move faster than I thought. If he's researching your medications, he's not content to wait for a divorce settlement. We need evidence, and we need it now." "What did you find out about Stanley Walsh?" That's the interesting part. Stanley Walsh has a gambling problem, substantial debts, history of financial desperation. 3 weeks before your accident, someone paid off $50,000 in gambling debts for him. The payment came from a shell company that traces back to a law firm, not Owen's firm, but one that has connections to Graham Thorne. The pieces were clicking into place with terrifying clarity. Owen and Graham hadn't just been planning insurance fraud, they'd bought themselves a desperate truck driver willing to cause an accident for money. "Shelby, if they paid Stanley to cause the accident, then this isn't attempted murder disguised as an accident. This is premeditated murder that didn't quite work as planned." Exactly. And if Owen realizes we're closing in on the truth, he might decide to finish what he started. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, processing the reality of my situation. The man I'd been married to for 12 years, the man I'd trusted with my life and my future, had literally tried to kill me for money. When that plan only partially succeeded, he'd shifted to a secondary strategy of financial manipulation and abandonment, with murder still as a backup option. But Owen had made several crucial mistakes. He'd underestimated my intelligence, overestimated his own cleverness, and left a trail of evidence that Shelby was systematically uncovering. Most importantly, he'd forgotten that the marketing skills that made me successful in my career, strategic thinking, attention to detail, understanding human psychology, were exactly the skills I needed to outmaneuver him at his own game. The student was about to teach the master a lesson he'd never forget, and this time, I was going to make sure Owen Richardson learned that attempting to destroy someone's life comes with consequences he never saw coming. Shelby's investigation over the next 48 hours revealed a conspiracy so intricate it would have been impressive if it weren't aimed at destroying my life. She'd uncovered financial records, phone logs, and connection points that painted a picture of systematic planning going back nearly 6 months. The shell company that paid Stanley Walsh's debts is called Midwest Holdings LLC, Shelby explained during our morning strategy session. It was established 4 months ago, with Graham Thorne listed as the registered agent. The funding came from 3 different sources: Owen's personal account, a client trust fund from Graham's firm, and a third party I'm still tracking down. I gripped my coffee cup tighter, processing the implications. A client trust fund? Graham's been stealing from his other clients to finance this? It gets worse. I found records of similar payments to 2 other trucking company employees over the past year. Different companies, different drivers, but the same pattern. Desperate people with gambling or drug debts getting sudden windfalls just before accidents involving personal injury cases that Graham's firm handled. The scope of their operation was staggering. Owen and Graham hadn't just targeted me. They'd been running a systematic insurance fraud scheme, orchestrating accidents to generate massive settlements they could manipulate and control. "How many people have they hurt?" I asked, feeling sick. I've identified at least 4 other cases where the pattern matches. Victims who suffered permanent disabilities in accidents involving drivers with sudden debt relief, all represented by Graham's firm, all with suspicious settlement negotiations. That afternoon brought the introduction of the third major player in Owen's conspiracy. A man I'd never seen before appeared in my room, introducing himself as Dr. Marcus Webb, a neuropsychologist who'd supposedly been asked to evaluate my cognitive function. "Mrs. Richardson," he said, settling into the chair with a briefcase full of assessment materials, "your husband has expressed some concerns about your decision-making capacity since the accident. I'm here to conduct a competency evaluation." Every alarm bell in my head went off simultaneously. This wasn't a routine medical consultation. This was Owen's attempt to get official documentation of my supposed mental incompetence. "Dr. Webb," I said carefully, "could you show me the referral for this evaluation? I'd like to understand who requested it and why." His smile faltered slightly. "Your husband has medical power of attorney." "No, he doesn't," I interrupted firmly. "I've reviewed all my medical documentation. No such power of attorney exists for my current treatment." Dr. Webb shifted uncomfortably, consulting his paperwork. "Perhaps there's been some confusion. Mr. Richardson was very clear that this evaluation was necessary for insurance purposes." "I'm sure he was. Dr. Webb, before we proceed, I'd like you to contact the hospital's patient rights coordinator and verify that proper consent has been obtained for this evaluation." The neuropsychologist's discomfort was obvious now. "Mrs. Richardson, if you're refusing the evaluation, that itself might indicate—" "I'm not refusing anything," I said calmly. "I'm simply requiring that proper medical protocols be followed. Unless you can produce valid consent documentation, this evaluation is unauthorized." After Dr. Webb left, promising to, quote, "clarify the consent issues," I immediately called Shelby with this new development. "They're accelerating their timeline," she said grimly. "If Owen's bringing in outside professionals to declare you incompetent, he's preparing to make major moves soon." "What did you find out about the third funding source for Midwest Holdings?" That's where things get really interesting. The third investor is someone named Marcus Webb, same name as your neuropsychologist friend. He's not just evaluating you, Pippa. He's financially invested in declaring you incompetent. The corruption ran deeper than I'd imagined. Owen hadn't just found a crooked lawyer and a desperate truck driver. He'd assembled an entire network of professionals willing to falsify medical and legal documents for money. That evening, Owen's visit carried a new urgency that confirmed my suspicions about the accelerated timeline. "Pip, we need to talk about some practical matters," he said, his tone carefully modulated to sound reasonable. "The doctors think you should have a cognitive evaluation before discharge, just to make sure the accident didn't affect your judgment in ways that aren't immediately obvious." "You mean the evaluation Dr. Webb tried to conduct without proper consent?" I replied, watching his reaction carefully. Owen's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of anger before the concerned husband persona reasserted itself. "There must have been some paperwork confusion. These things happen in hospitals." "I'm sure they do. Owen, I've been thinking about our finances. I'd like to review our insurance policies and the settlement negotiations myself." "Pippa, you don't need to worry about those details while you're recovering." "I'm not an invalid," I interrupted, letting some steel enter my voice. "I'm paralyzed, not brain damaged. I'm perfectly capable of understanding financial documents." Owen's jaw tightened. "Of course you are. I just thought it would be less stressful if I handled the complex legal aspects. I appreciate your concern, but I want to be involved in decisions about my own life. I'd like to meet with our insurance adjusters directly." That's not really how these things work in complex cases like this." "Then help me understand how they do work. I'd like you to arrange a meeting with all the insurance representatives, our real adjusters, so I can understand exactly what's being negotiated on my behalf." The panic in Owen's eyes was unmistakable now. He was trapped between his need to maintain control over the settlement negotiations and his inability to produce the fictional insurance representatives he'd been claiming to work with. "Let me see what I can arrange," he said finally, his voice strained. After he left, I called Andrew Lawson, the junior associate from Graham's firm, who'd expressed concerns about the missing power of attorney documents. "Andrew, this is Pippa Richardson. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Mrs. Richardson, I'm not sure I should." "Andrew, I think you're an honest person who's gotten caught up in something you didn't understand. I also think you're smart enough to realize that your career could be destroyed if you stay involved in what's happening." The silence on the other end stretched for nearly a minute before Andrew spoke again. "What do you want to know?" "I want to know about the other cases, the pattern of accidents and settlements that Graham's firm has been handling. And I want to know what you're willing to do to make sure this stops before someone else gets hurt." By the end of that conversation, I had my second insider witness and confirmation that Graham's fraud scheme involved at least 6 other victims over the past 18 months. The web of deception Owen and Graham had woven was intricate and far-reaching, but like all webs, it had a fatal weakness. The more complex it became, the more vulnerable it was to being torn apart once someone found the right thread to pull. And I was about to start pulling very hard. The turning point came on a Thursday morning when Detective Sarah Collins from the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit walked into my room. Her presence immediately changed the atmosphere. This wasn't a social visit or a routine follow-up. This was an official investigation. "Mrs. Richardson," she said, settling into the chair with a notepad and recording device, "I'm investigating some irregularities that have come to our attention regarding insurance fraud and potential witness tampering. I understand you may have information relevant to our inquiry." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "What kind of irregularities?" "We've received reports about unauthorized insurance negotiations, falsified medical documentation, and financial transactions that suggest a pattern of orchestrated accidents for settlement fraud." I realized that Andrew Lawson had followed through on his promise to contact the authorities, but I needed to be careful about how much I revealed without knowing the scope of their investigation. "Detective Collins, before I answer any questions, I need to know something. Am I a potential victim in this investigation, or am I being investigated as a participant?" Her expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Richardson, based on what we've uncovered so far, you appear to be a victim of a sophisticated fraud scheme. We're hoping you can help us understand the full scope of what's been happening." Over the next hour, I walked Detective Collins through everything I'd discovered. Owen's unauthorized insurance communications, the false claims about my mental competency, the mysterious Dr. Webb, and the settlement offers I'd never been allowed to review. I also provided her with Shelby's contact information and the evidence my friend had been gathering. "Mrs. Richardson," Detective Collins said when I finished, "what you're describing aligns with a much larger investigation we've been conducting. Your husband and Graham Thorne are part of a network we've been tracking for several months. How did you find out about them?" "Stanley Walsh, the truck driver who caused your accident. He came forward 3 weeks ago, claiming he'd been paid to cause accidents that would result in serious injuries but not deaths. He's been cooperating with our investigation in exchange for leniency." The room seemed to spin slightly. Stanley Walsh had confessed. The man who'd paralyzed me had admitted it was intentional, that Owen had paid him to destroy my life. Stanley said he was supposed to cause an accident that would result in serious injury, permanent disability but not death. He was given very specific instructions about timing, location, and the type of impact needed. I closed my eyes, processing this confirmation of what I'd suspected. "So Owen literally ordered my paralysis." "It appears so. But Mrs. Richardson," Stanley also told us something else. "Your husband wasn't satisfied with the outcome of your accident. He's been asking about additional services." The blood drained from my face. "What kind of additional services?" "Stanley said your husband contacted him 2 weeks ago, asking about making accidents look like medical complications. Specifically, accidents that might happen to someone with your type of injuries and medication schedule." The room felt like it was closing in around me. Owen wasn't just planning to abandon me. He was actively planning to finish what the truck accident had started. Detective Collins leaned forward, her expression grave. Mrs. Richardson, we believe you're in immediate danger. We need to move quickly to protect you and gather enough evidence to arrest everyone involved in this conspiracy. That afternoon, while Owen was presumably at work, Detective Collins coordinated with hospital security to install recording equipment in my room. She also arranged for an undercover officer to pose as a new nurse on the evening shift, providing additional protection without alerting Owen to the investigation. The plan was simple but dangerous. I would continue acting as though I suspected nothing while recording conversations that would provide the final evidence needed for arrests. Detective Collins emphasized that I shouldn't try to confront Owen directly or push him into admissions, just let him reveal his plans naturally. The key, she explained, is to let him think he's still in control while we document everything he says and does. At 6:30 p.m., Owen arrived for his usual evening visit, but something was different. He seemed agitated, constantly checking his phone and glancing toward the door as if expecting interruption. "Is everything okay?" I asked, genuinely curious about what was making him so nervous. "Just some complications with the legal paperwork," he said, but his smile was forced. "Graham's been dealing with some challenges from the insurance companies." I nodded sympathetically, knowing that the challenges were probably related to Detective Collins's investigation. "Nothing serious, I hope?" "No, just bureaucratic nonsense. These insurance companies make everything complicated when significant money is involved." The recording device hidden in my bedside table was capturing every word, but I needed to be careful not to seem like I was fishing for information. "Owen, I've been thinking about what happens when I'm discharged, about coming home and adjusting to everything." His expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "What about it?" "Well, the house isn't wheelchair accessible, and I'll need help with medications, appointments, daily care. It's going to be a big adjustment for both of us." Owen was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was choosing his words carefully. "Pippa, we need to be realistic about what's possible. Your care needs are going to be extensive, long-term. Are you saying you can't handle it?" Another pause. "I'm saying we might need to consider other options. Professional care facilities, specialized programs, places that are better equipped to handle someone with your limitations." The word limitations carried a contempt that he'd never bothered to hide anymore. But more importantly, he was laying groundwork for abandoning me in a care facility where an "accidental medical complication" would be easier to arrange and less likely to be investigated. "I see," I said quietly. "And what about us? Our marriage?" Owen's mask finally slipped completely. "Pippa, you need to understand that everything's changed. I never signed up for this. I can't spend the rest of my life taking care of someone who's never going to get better." The recording device captured every callous word, as Owen essentially confessed to planning our divorce, while simultaneously researching ways to ensure I wouldn't survive long enough to collect the settlement money. What Owen didn't know was that Detective Collins was listening to every word from the security office, building the case that would destroy him and everyone who'd helped him try to destroy me. The external forces were closing in, and Owen Richardson was about to learn that when you try to orchestrate someone's destruction, you better make sure they're actually destroyed. Because if they survive, they tend to remember everything. The next morning brought chaos that confirmed Detective Collins's warning about the accelerated timeline. Owen arrived at 8 a.m., 3 hours earlier than his usual schedule, with Graham Thorne and Dr. Webb in tow, all looking like men who'd been up all night planning something desperate. "Pippa," Owen said, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that didn't match the tension in his shoulders, "we've arranged for Dr. Webb to complete that cognitive evaluation today. The insurance company is requiring it before they'll process any settlement offers." I looked at the 3 men standing around my bed and realized this was their final play. Whatever Detective Collins's investigation had stirred up, it had spooked them into moving immediately to establish my incompetence before they lost control entirely. "I see," I said calmly, reaching for the call button. "Let me ask the nurse to witness this evaluation, just to ensure everything is properly documented." Graham stepped forward quickly. "That won't be necessary, Mrs. Richardson. Dr. Webb's assessment will be comprehensive and professionally documented." I'm sure it will be, I replied, finger hovering over the call button. But, as the patient, I have the right to have hospital staff present during any medical procedures. Dr. Webb exchanged glances with Owen and Graham before speaking. Mrs. Richardson, this evaluation requires a controlled environment without distractions. Additional personnel could compromise the validity of the results. Translation. They needed to conduct their fake assessment without witnesses who might later testify that I was completely competent during the evaluation. Gentlemen, I said, my voice taking on the authoritative tone I'd used in boardroom negotiations, I'm going to make this very simple. Either this evaluation is conducted according to proper medical protocols with appropriate hospital oversight, or it doesn't happen at all. Owen's mask of patience was cracking visibly. Pippa, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to protect your interests here. My interests? By conducting unauthorized medical evaluations with doctors I've never met, using protocols I haven't consented to, without proper hospital supervision. I let my voice rise slightly. Owen, what exactly are you protecting me from? The three men exchanged looks that confirmed they were communicating something I wasn't supposed to understand. Graham cleared his throat and stepped forward with what I recognized as his courtroom voice. Mrs. Richardson, I think there may be some confusion about the legal requirements here. As your husband's attorney, I can explain that certain evaluations are mandatory for insurance claims of this magnitude. Then you can explain them to the hospital's legal department, I said firmly, and to my attorney. Dead silence. Owen's face went white. Your attorney? Did you think I was going to navigate $1 million insurance settlement without legal representation? I may be paralyzed, Owen, but I'm not stupid. Of course, I didn't actually have an attorney yet, but the bluff had the desired effect. Graham was now looking genuinely panicked, probably calculating how quickly their scheme would unravel if I had independent legal counsel reviewing their actions. Pippa, Owen said, his voice taking on a pleading tone, why are you making this so difficult? I'm trying to take care of everything so you don't have to worry about the details. Because the details are my life, Owen. And I've decided I want to be involved in decisions about my own future. Dr. Webb gathered his assessment materials with obvious frustration. Mr. Richardson, perhaps we should reschedule this evaluation when Mrs. Richardson is feeling more cooperative. I'm feeling perfectly cooperative, I said sweetly. Cooperative with proper medical protocols and legal procedures. What I'm not feeling cooperative with is unauthorized medical evaluations conducted by doctors with undisclosed financial interests in the outcome. The color drained from Dr. Webb's face. He hadn't expected me to know about his investment in Midwest Holdings, LLC, but Shelby's investigation had been thorough. After the three men left with promises to clarify the procedural requirements, I immediately called Detective Collins. They just tried to conduct an unauthorized competency evaluation, I reported. All three of them together, Owen, Graham, and Dr. Webb. That's desperation, Detective Collins said grimly. We intercepted some communications last night that suggest they know we're closing in. Stanley Walsh told us he received a call from Graham Thorne yesterday, asking about his willingness to leave town for an extended period. My blood ran cold. They're trying to make their key witness disappear? It looks that way. But it also means they're panicking, which makes them dangerous. Mrs. Richardson, we need to move up our timeline. Can you handle one more recorded conversation with your husband? What do you need? We need him to admit on tape that he paid Stanley Walsh to cause your accident. If you can get him to confirm the premeditation, we'll have everything we need for murder charges. That afternoon, Owen returned alone, looking haggard and desperate. The confident lawyer persona was completely gone, replaced by someone who was clearly feeling trapped. Pippa, we need to talk, he said, closing the door behind him, a gesture I'd never seen him make during previous visits. About what? About being realistic. About understanding that this situation, our situation, isn't sustainable long term. I maintained my composure while the recording device captured every word. What do you mean by not sustainable? Owen ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture that indicated he was about to say something he'd been rehearsing. The medical bills alone are going to bankrupt us. Your care needs, the house modifications, the long-term expenses. Even with the insurance settlement, it's not going to be enough. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it would be better for everyone if you weren't suffering through this. If you could just let go. The room went deadly quiet. Owen had just suggested I should die, and the recording device had captured every word. Let go, I repeated, wanting absolute clarity on the record. People with your injuries. Complications happen. Medical issues, medication problems. It would be peaceful, and it would solve so many problems for both of us. There it was. Owen Richardson, suggesting that my death would be the ideal solution to our current difficulties, recorded for posterity and a jury to hear. Owen, I said quietly, are you asking me to kill myself? His eyes met mine for the first time in weeks, and what I saw there was pure desperation mixed with something that might have been relief at finally saying what he'd been thinking. I'm saying that sometimes the kindest thing is to stop fighting a battle you can't win. The recording device had just captured Owen Richardson, essentially admitting that he wanted me dead and was willing to help make it happen. Detective Collins now had everything she needed to destroy him completely. But Owen wasn't done yet. Desperate people don't give up easily, and I was about to learn exactly how far he was willing to go to solve his problem permanently. After Owen left that evening with his chilling suggestion still hanging in the air, Detective Collins arrived within minutes, her face grim as she reviewed the recording equipment. We have enough for attempted murder charges, she said, carefully removing the recording device. But Mrs. Richardson, what he said today suggests he's moved beyond planning. He's preparing to act. The weight of those words settled over me like ice water. Owen wasn't just fantasizing about my death anymore. He was actively considering how to make it happen. What do we do now? I asked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Now we build a case so airtight that Owen Richardson, and everyone who helped him, will never see the outside of a prison cell again. That night, Detective Collins coordinated what she called Operation Safety Net, a comprehensive plan to protect me while gathering the final evidence needed to arrest the entire conspiracy. The plan required careful timing and multiple allies working in coordination. First, she introduced me to Agent Patricia Martinez from the FBI's Insurance Fraud Division. The case had grown beyond local jurisdiction when Shelby's investigation revealed the multi-state scope of Graham's accident orchestration scheme. Mrs. Richardson, Agent Martinez explained, we've been tracking this network for 8 months. Your case is the breakthrough we needed to understand how they've been operating. Graham Thorne's firm has been involved in suspicious settlements across 3 states, always with the same pattern. Desperate drivers getting sudden financial relief just before causing accidents that result in permanent disabilities. The scope was staggering. Owen and Graham hadn't just targeted me. They'd been running a systematic operation that had destroyed dozens of lives for financial gain. How many victims? I asked. 17 confirmed cases over the past 2 years. Your case is unique because you survived with enough awareness to document their post-accident fraud. Most of their other victims either died or were too traumatized to recognize the manipulation. Agent Martinez spread out photographs and case files across my hospital table. Sarah Chen in Portland, paralyzed in a truck accident 6 months ago. The driver had gambling debts paid off the week before. Michael Torres in Phoenix, lost both legs when a delivery truck's brakes failed. The driver's mortgage was mysteriously paid current just days before the accident. Looking at the faces of Owen's other victims, I felt a rage that burned hotter than my fear. These weren't just crimes, they were systematic attempts to destroy human lives for money. What can I do to help you stop them? I asked. We need you to participate in one final recorded conversation, Agent Martinez said. But this time, we're going to set a trap that will expose the entire network. The plan was elegantly simple. I would call Owen and tell him I'd been thinking about his suggestion, that maybe he was right about letting go. I would ask him to help me understand my options, to guide me through what he thought would be best. The key, Detective Collins explained, is to let him believe he's convincing you to accept death as a solution. If he thinks you're willing to cooperate with ending your life, he might reveal details about how he planned the original accident and how he's been covering it up. Shelby had flown back from Denver with additional evidence that would support the case. She'd uncovered financial records showing Owen had been systematically draining our joint accounts over the past 6 months, moving money into offshore accounts he thought I couldn't access. "He's been planning this for a long time," she reported during our strategy meeting. "The accident was just one part of a larger scheme to steal your assets and eliminate you as a witness to his fraud." But Shelby had also discovered something that changed our understanding of Owen's motivations entirely. "Pippa, your husband is in serious financial trouble. He owes money to some very dangerous people. Gambling debts, investment losses, loans from people who don't accept late payments. The insurance settlement from your case isn't just greed, it's survival. If he doesn't pay these debts soon, he's going to be the one who ends up dead." This revelation reframed everything. Owen wasn't just a callous husband seeking easy money. He was a desperate man who'd orchestrated my paralysis because he was facing his own potential murder if he couldn't raise substantial cash quickly. The next morning brought an unexpected ally when Carrie, Owen's sister, called asking to visit. When she arrived, her distress was obvious. "Pippa, I've been losing sleep over our last conversation," she said, settling into the chair with obvious discomfort. "Owen's been acting strange lately, and some things he said, I think you need to know about them." Carrie revealed that Owen had been asking her about my life insurance policies, my will provisions, and whether she thought I'd ever find peace with my condition. He'd also mentioned that people with spinal cord injuries often developed complications that could be life-threatening. "He asked me if I thought you'd want to live like this forever," she said quietly. When I said of course you would, that you're strong and would adapt, he got angry. He said I didn't understand how much you were suffering. More importantly, Carrie revealed that Owen had asked her to be a character witness if questions ever arose about his devotion during my care. He'd been building an alibi that would support a narrative of loving husband facing impossible circumstances. "Carrie," I said carefully, "if something happens to me, if I have an accident or medical complication, I need you to know that Owen might be responsible. Can you remember this conversation?" Her face went pale, but she nodded. "Pippa, is Owen planning to hurt you?" "I think Owen is planning to solve his problems by making sure I don't survive long enough to collect my insurance settlement." By that afternoon, we had assembled a network of allies that included law enforcement, federal agents, hospital staff, and even Owen's own sister. Everyone understood their role in the final phase of our operation. The trap was set. Owen Richardson was about to learn that when you try to isolate and destroy someone, you better make sure they don't have the intelligence and determination to build their own army. And my army was about to show him exactly what happened to people who mistook physical disability for helplessness. The final trap required precision timing that would have impressed my former marketing clients. Every detail had to be perfect, because we would only get one chance to capture Owen's full confession before he realized the net was closing around him. Detective Collins spent the morning briefing me on the psychological approach that would be most effective. "The key is to appeal to his ego," she explained. "Owen thinks he's the smartest person in the room. Let him believe he's successfully manipulating you into accepting his solution." Agent Martinez had coordinated with the hospital to ensure that all of Owen's usual entry and exit routes were monitored. Hidden cameras had been positioned to capture not just audio but video evidence of his demeanor and body language during what we all hoped would be his final confession. "Remember," Agent Martinez emphasized, "don't push too hard for details. Let him volunteer information. If he feels like you're interrogating him, he'll shut down." Shelby had arrived early that morning with the final piece of evidence we needed. Financial records proving that Owen had been in contact with Stanley Walsh for months before my accident. Bank transfers, phone records, even parking garage surveillance footage of them meeting 3 weeks before the crash. "The paper trail is airtight," she reported during our final strategy session. "Owen paid Stanley $25,000 initially, with another $25,000 paid after your accident. But here's the interesting part. Owen also paid for Stanley's legal representation when he was questioned by police after the crash. This detail was crucial because it demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Owen hadn't just arranged the accident. He'd taken steps to ensure his co-conspirator would have legal protection if questions arose. The hospital had coordinated with the nursing staff to ensure Owen's visit would appear completely normal. The undercover officer posing as a nurse would be stationed nearby, but out of sight. All medical equipment in my room had been tested to ensure the recording devices wouldn't interfere with any legitimate monitoring systems. Dr. Chen, my attending physician, had agreed to play a crucial role in this setup. He would visit my room 30 minutes before Owen's expected arrival and have a conversation about my deteriorating emotional state that Owen would be able to overhear from the hallway. "Mrs. Richardson has been asking about end-of-life options," Dr. Chen would say to the nurse, loud enough for Owen to hear. "She seems to be losing hope about her recovery prospects. Her family should be prepared for some difficult conversations." This would prime Owen to believe I was emotionally vulnerable and receptive to his suggestions about letting go. At 2 p.m., exactly on schedule, Dr. Chen had his staged conversation outside my room. I could hear Owen's footsteps pause in the hallway, confirming he was listening. When he entered my room 5 minutes later, his expression carried a mixture of anticipation and calculated sympathy. "Pippa, sweetheart," he said, settling into the chair with practiced concern. "The nurse mentioned you've been having a difficult day." "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," I replied, letting my voice carry the exhaustion I actually felt. "About being realistic." Owen leaned forward, his attention sharpening like a predator sensing wounded prey. "What kind of thoughts?" "About whether fighting this is worth it. About whether you're right that some battles can't be won." I watched his face carefully as hope flickered in his eyes. He thought I was giving up, that his psychological manipulation was working. "Pippa, I know this is painful to consider, but sometimes accepting reality is the kindest thing we can do for ourselves and the people who love us." "I need you to help me understand something," I said, setting the hook. "Yesterday you mentioned that complications happen with injuries like mine. What did you mean?" Owen glanced toward the door, ensuring we weren't being overheard, then spoke in a lower voice. "Medical complications, medication interactions, infections that can become systemic. With spinal cord injuries, the body becomes more vulnerable to things that wouldn't normally be dangerous. You've researched this?" "I've had to educate myself about what we're facing," he said, and there was genuine emotion in his voice, relief that I was finally accepting what he saw as the inevitable solution. "Owen, can I ask you something that might sound strange?" "Of course. Sometimes I wonder if the accident was meant to be worse than it was. If maybe I was supposed to die that night instead of just being paralyzed." Owen went very still, and I could almost see his mind racing through the implications of my question. This was the moment where he would either reveal everything or shut down completely. "Why would you think that?" he asked carefully. "Because everything that's happened since, the insurance complications, the financial pressures, the way you've had to sacrifice your life to take care of me, it would all be simpler if I hadn't survived." Owen stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the internal struggle playing across his face. Part of him wanted to maintain his facade of devoted husband, but a larger part was desperate to finally share the burden of what he'd been carrying alone. "Pippa," he said finally, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "what if I told you that sometimes things don't happen the way they're supposed to? That sometimes people have to make difficult choices to protect the people they love?" The recording equipment was capturing every word as Owen Richardson prepared to confess to the premeditated destruction of my life. All I had to do was give him permission to believe that I wanted to hear the truth. I looked into Owen's eyes and saw a man teetering on the edge of complete confession. The weight of his deception was clearly eating at him, and my apparent willingness to understand was offering him something he'd been craving, the chance to justify his actions to someone who might forgive him. "Owen," I said softly, "I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. I can handle it." He took a deep breath, glanced once more toward the door, then made the decision that would destroy his life forever. "The accident wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "I arranged it." Even though I'd known this was coming, hearing him say the words out loud hit me like a physical blow. The recording equipment captured every syllable as my husband confessed to orchestrating my paralysis. You paid Stanley Walsh to hit me? Owen nodded, his relief at finally sharing his secret clearly visible. I was in trouble, Pippa, serious trouble. I owed money to people who don't forgive debts, and I was running out of time. How much money? 200,000. Gambling debts, bad investments, loans I took, trying to cover the gambling losses. They were going to kill me, Pippa. Literally kill me. The desperation in his voice was genuine, but it made his actions even more horrifying. He'd destroyed my life to save his own. So you decided to kill me instead? No, Owen said quickly. Never kill you. That's why I was so specific with Stanley about the type of accident. Serious injury, permanent disability, but not death. I needed you alive for the insurance claims, but injured enough that the settlements would be substantial. My stomach churned as he laid out the calculated precision of his planning. He'd literally ordered my paralysis with the same attention to detail he brought to legal contracts. The spinal cord injury was intentional? Stanley had experience with these things. He knew exactly how to hit your car to cause maximum damage to your lower back without risking your life. The timing, the angle, the speed, it was all calculated. And after the accident? Owen's expression grew more animated as he warmed to his subject, apparently believing I was impressed by his thoroughness. I handled all the insurance communications to make sure the settlements would be maximized. The trucking company's insurance was willing to pay $1.2 million to avoid a jury trial. Your disability policy pays $8,000 monthly for life. Combined with your life insurance and our joint assets, it would have been enough to pay off my debts and set us both up financially. Would have been? Owen's face darkened. The insurance companies started asking questions. That detective got involved. Stanley got scared and started talking. Everything began falling apart. So you decided I needed to die after all? The words hung in the air between us like poison gas. Owen stared at me for a long moment before nodding slowly. Pippa, you have to understand. If the investigation continues, if Stanley tells them everything, I'm going to prison for the rest of my life. The people I owe money to will kill me in there, if they don't kill me before the trial. So you thought if I died, the investigation would end? A tragic complication from your injuries. People would be sympathetic, not suspicious. The insurance money would pay out to me as your widower, and I could disappear somewhere safe. I felt a rage so pure it was almost calming. Owen had just confessed to orchestrating my paralysis and planning my murder, all while sitting beside my hospital bed and speaking as if he were discussing weather patterns. How were you planning to kill me? Owen pulled a small vial from his jacket pocket, clear liquid that looked innocuous but made my blood run cold. Insulin. Massive dose injected into your IV line. For someone without diabetes, it causes immediate hypoglycemic shock. Looks like a medical complication, especially in someone with your injuries. The recording equipment captured Owen Richardson holding what amounted to a murder weapon, while explaining exactly how he planned to use it to kill his wife. Owen, I said, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through me, do you realize what you just told me? Something in my tone must have penetrated his confession-induced relief, because his expression suddenly shifted from justification to alarm. Pippa, you just confessed to attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and premeditated murder, all while holding the weapon you planned to use to kill me. The color drained from Owen's face as reality crashed over him. He'd been so desperate to justify his actions, so relieved to finally share his burden, that he'd forgotten he was talking to his intended victim. The room is wired, Owen. Every word you've said has been recorded. Detective Collins has been listening from the security office. Owen's eyes darted around the room frantically, finally noticing details he'd missed. The subtle differences in equipment placement, the small modifications that accommodated surveillance devices. You knew? I've known since the beginning. About Stanley, about Graham, about Dr. Webb, about all of it. The only thing I didn't know was exactly how coldly you could plan my murder while sitting beside my hospital bed bringing me flowers. Owen stood up abruptly, the insulin vial still clutched in his hand, his mind clearly racing through escape options. but it was far too late for escape. The door opened, and Detective Collins entered, followed by Agent Martinez and 2 uniformed officers. "Owen Richardson," Detective Collins said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a case finally solved. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and about 12 other felonies we'll discuss downtown." As the handcuffs clicked around Owen's wrists, he looked at me with an expression that combined rage, betrayal, and disbelief. "You set me up," he said. "No, Owen," I replied calmly. "You set yourself up. I just made sure everyone could hear exactly who you really are." The hours following Owen's arrest unfolded like a perfectly choreographed legal symphony. Detective Collins and Agent Martinez had spent months preparing for this moment, and the evidence they presented to the district attorney's office was so comprehensive, it left no room for denial or plea bargaining. Within 6 hours of Owen's confession, Graham Thorne was arrested at his law office while attempting to shred documents. Dr. Marcus Webb was taken into custody at his home, where agents found detailed files on 17 other, quote, cognitive evaluations he'd falsified over the past 2 years. Stanley Walsh, already in protective custody, was formally charged but received immunity in exchange for his continued cooperation. "Mrs. Richardson," Agent Martinez explained during our debriefing session, "what we've uncovered is the largest insurance fraud conspiracy in Chicago's history. Your husband and his associates orchestrated at least 19 separate accidents, resulting in over $30 million in fraudulent insurance claims. She spread out case files across my hospital table, each one representing a life destroyed by Owen's network. Thanks to your cooperation and the evidence we gathered, we can now provide justice for every single victim." The evidence was overwhelming in both scope and detail. The financial records Shelby had uncovered traced money flows from Graham's client trust accounts through shell companies to the offshore accounts where Owen had been hiding assets. Phone records showed hundreds of communications between the conspirators over the past 2 years, planning accidents with the precision of military operations. But the most damning evidence was the recording of Owen's complete confession. Agent Martinez played portions of it back for me, and hearing his casual discussion of ordering my paralysis was somehow even more horrifying the second time. "He calculated the exact type of impact needed to damage your spinal cord without killing you," she noted, consulting her transcript. "That level of premeditation elevates this to first-degree attempted murder with special circumstances." Detective Collins had also uncovered Owen's backup plan in terrifying detail. His internet search history revealed months of research into medication interactions, insulin overdoses, and methods for causing accidental deaths in hospital patients. He'd even visited medical supply companies, posing as a nursing student to learn about IV access and injection techniques. "The insulin he brought to your room yesterday," Detective Collins explained, "was concentrated medical-grade insulin stolen from a diabetic patient's room 2 floors down. One injection would have killed you within minutes, while making it look like a spontaneous hypoglycemic crisis." The scope of the conspiracy extended far beyond what any of us had initially imagined. Graham's law firm had been operating the fraud scheme for 3 years, targeting victims based on their insurance coverage and asset portfolios. They specifically sought people with substantial disability policies and life insurance, then orchestrated accidents that would generate maximum settlement values. "Your case was unique," Agent Martinez noted, "because you had both high-value disability coverage and significant personal assets. Owen stood to gain nearly $2 million between settlement money and insurance payouts. But the investigation had also revealed the pressure Owen was under from his creditors. The gambling debts he'd mentioned were just the beginning. He'd also embezzled money from his firm's client accounts and taken loans from organized crime figures who were growing impatient about repayment. He was 3 weeks away from being killed by his creditors when he arranged your accident," Detective Collins explained. "Your paralysis was literally his last chance at survival." The evidence presentation continued throughout the afternoon as federal agents revealed the multi-state scope of the operation. Similar networks had been operating in Phoenix, Portland, and Denver, all connected through Graham's law school contacts and professional associations. My friend Shelby had been instrumental in uncovering these connections. Her investigation had identified the pattern of shell companies and offshore accounts that allowed the conspiracy to move money across state lines without detection. "The beauty of their system," Shelby explained, "was that each accident looked completely isolated. different states, different insurance companies, different trucking firms. Without your case breaking everything open, they could have continued this for years. The human cost was staggering. 17 people had been permanently disabled, 3 had died from complications related to their orchestrated injuries, and dozens of families had been financially devastated by medical expenses and lost income. Owen's greed had created a trail of destroyed lives spanning multiple states. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when agents searched Owen's home office. Hidden in a fireproof safe, they found detailed profiles of potential future victims, people Owen and Graham had identified as suitable targets for their next round of orchestrated accidents. "Your name was in that safe," Agent Martinez told me quietly. "But it wasn't the only one. We found files on 12 other potential victims they were planning to target over the next 6 months." The evidence was so comprehensive that Owen's defense attorney contacted the prosecutor's office within 24 hours, seeking a plea agreement. But District Attorney Sarah Chen had made her position clear. With evidence this overwhelming and crimes this serious, there would be no deals. "We're seeking life sentences without parole for the primary conspirators," she announced at a press conference. "This case represents a level of premeditated cruelty that demands the maximum possible consequences." As I sat in my hospital room that evening, reviewing the mountain of evidence that would ensure Owen's conviction, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or revenge, but a profound sadness for all the lives that had been destroyed by one man's desperate choices. Owen had traded his soul for money, and in the process he'd revealed himself to be something far worse than a failed husband or a desperate debtor. He'd become a predator who fed on human suffering for profit. But now the predator had become the prey, and the justice system was about to show him exactly what happened to people who thought they could orchestrate other people's destruction without consequences. The systematic unraveling of Owen's conspiracy began within hours of his arrest and accelerated with each passing day as the full scope of the network's corruption became clear. What started as a personal betrayal had evolved into the largest insurance fraud investigation in Illinois history. Graham Thorne's law firm collapsed overnight. When news of the arrests became public, clients fled en masse, taking their cases to other attorneys and demanding investigations into their own settlements. The Illinois State Bar suspended Graham's license pending criminal proceedings, and 3 other partners at the firm were arrested as the investigation revealed their complicity in the document falsification scheme. The entire firm was essentially a criminal enterprise, Agent Martinez explained during one of our daily briefings. They weren't practicing law. They were operating an organized crime syndicate that used legal credentials as cover. Dr. Marcus Webb's medical practice suffered a similar fate. The state medical board revoked his license after discovering he'd been conducting fraudulent competency evaluations for 3 years. His patient files revealed dozens of cases where he'd declared mentally competent individuals as incompetent, usually coinciding with significant financial benefits for family members who'd paid for his services. But the most dramatic collapse came from Stanley Walsh's complete cooperation with federal investigators. Facing life in prison for his role in multiple vehicular assaults, Stanley provided detailed testimony about every accident he'd been paid to cause. Stanley kept meticulous records, Detective Collins reported. Dates, payment amounts, specific instructions about the type and severity of injuries to cause. He treated it like a business, which means we have documentary evidence of every crime. The ripple effects extended far beyond the primary conspirators. Insurance companies launched internal investigations to identify potentially fraudulent claims, resulting in the discovery of suspicious patterns dating back 5 years. 3 trucking companies were found to have employees who'd been compromised by the network, leading to federal transportation safety violations and company-wide audits. Owen's financial situation crumbled as quickly as his freedom. Federal agents seized all assets connected to the conspiracy, including our house, his retirement accounts, and the offshore accounts where he'd been hiding stolen money. The life insurance policy he'd been planning to collect was voided due to the attempted murder charges, leaving him with nothing except legal bills he couldn't afford. His creditors, the dangerous men who'd driven him to orchestrate my accident in the first place, learned about his arrest from news reports. According to Detective Collins, Owen had requested protective custody within 48 hours of his booking, citing credible death threats from people he owed money to. Ironically, she noted with dark humor, the prison system is now protecting Owen from the same people whose threats led him to try to kill you. The psychological impact on Owen was visible during his court appearances. The confident lawyer who'd manipulated my medical care and planned my death had been replaced by a broken man who seemed genuinely shocked that his carefully constructed scheme had collapsed so completely. Carrie, Owen's sister, visited me one final time to apologize for her brother's actions and to provide additional evidence she'd discovered while cleaning out his apartment. "I found journals," she said quietly, placing a box of notebooks on my hospital table. Owen wrote down everything: his planning, his doubts, his justifications. He documented his own crimes in detail. The journals revealed the full extent of Owen's psychological deterioration over the months leading up to my accident. What had started as desperate financial planning had evolved into elaborate fantasies about controlling my life and death. The entry showed a man who'd convinced himself that orchestrating my paralysis was actually an act of love, sparing me from a future he'd decided I wouldn't want to live. Perhaps most chilling was his detailed planning for my eventual murder, written with the same methodical approach he'd once applied to legal briefs. He'd researched my medication schedule, studied my daily routines, and calculated the optimal timing for making my death appear accidental. But the journals also revealed Owen's growing paranoia in the days before his arrest. He'd suspected that Stanley Walsh might betray him, worried that Graham's other schemes would draw law enforcement attention, and even questioned whether I was more aware of my surroundings than I appeared. He knew something was wrong, I told Detective Collins after reviewing the entries. He just couldn't figure out what. The final entry, dated the day before his confession, was particularly revealing. "Pippa seems different today. More alert, asking too many questions. But she's paralyzed and traumatized. What could she really do? Tomorrow I'll convince her that letting go is the kindest option. This will all be over soon." Owen Richardson had been so convinced of his own superiority, so certain that my physical disability made me helpless, that he'd walked directly into a trap of his own making. His arrogance had become the architect of his destruction. The Cook County Courthouse had never seen a case quite like Owen Richardson's. When jury selection began 6 months after his arrest, the media attention was so intense that extra security was required to manage the crowds of reporters and victims' families seeking justice. District Attorney Sarah Chen had assembled a prosecution team that treated Owen's case like a death penalty trial, even though Illinois didn't have capital punishment. The evidence was so overwhelming that the real challenge wasn't proving guilt. It was ensuring the sentences would reflect the magnitude of the crimes. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Chen began in her opening statement, "you are about to hear testimony about a conspiracy so calculated, so coldly executed, that it challenges our basic understanding of human decency. The defendant didn't just betray his wife's trust. He orchestrated her permanent disability for money, then planned to murder her when that wasn't profitable enough." I testified on the second day of the trial, wheeling myself to the witness stand while Owen sat at the defense table, unable to meet my eyes. The courtroom was silent as I described, discovering the conspiracy, documenting the evidence, and finally recording Owen's complete confession. "Mrs. Richardson," the prosecutor asked, "when your husband suggested you should let go, did you understand what he meant?" "He meant I should die," I replied clearly, my voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "He was asking me to cooperate with my own murder." Owen's defense attorney had attempted to argue temporary insanity caused by financial pressure, but the prosecution's evidence of systematic planning over 18 months made that strategy impossible. The journals Carrie had found, the detailed financial records, and Owen's recorded confession painted a picture of a man who'd known exactly what he was doing every step of the way. Stanley Walsh's testimony was devastating. He described in detail how Owen had approached him, how the payment system worked, and how Owen had provided specific instructions about the type of accident that would cause permanent paralysis without death. "Mr. Richardson was very clear," Stanley testified, his voice barely above a whisper. "He wanted his wife seriously injured but alive. He said he needed her conscious for insurance purposes, but disabled enough that the settlement would be substantial." Graham Thorne, facing his own trial, had attempted to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. His testimony revealed the broader scope of their operation and implicated Owen as the mastermind behind several other orchestrated accidents. The most powerful moment came when Dr. Chen read Owen's journal entries aloud to the jury. The clinical precision with which Owen had planned my death was more damning than any prosecution argument could have been. Today I researched insulin overdose symptoms. Dr. Chen read from an entry dated 2 weeks before Owen's arrest. The victim experiences confusion, sweating, then loss of consciousness followed by coma and death. In a patient with spinal cord injuries, this would appear to be a medical complication rather than homicide. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman's voice was steady as she read the verdict: guilty on all counts. Owen was convicted of attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, embezzlement, and 17 counts of conspiracy to cause bodily harm in connection with the other victims. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole, plus an additional 150 years for the related charges. Graham Thorne received a similar sentence after his separate trial. Dr. Webb was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Stanley Walsh, in exchange for his cooperation, received 15 years with possibility of parole after 10 years. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the justice process was the civil settlements. The insurance companies, eager to avoid wrongful death lawsuits, agreed to substantial settlements for all of Owen's victims. My own settlement, combined with the recovery of assets Owen had stolen, left me financially secure for life. Justice isn't just about punishment, District Attorney Chen told me after sentencing. It's about restoration. What Owen tried to take from you, your security, your future, your peace of mind, the legal system has worked to restore. The trial had taken 8 months from arrest to sentencing, but the outcome was unequivocal. Owen Richardson, the man who tried to orchestrate my destruction, would spend the rest of his life in a prison cell, while I was free to rebuild my life on my own terms. 1 year after Owen's sentencing, I sat in the boardroom of my new company, Richardson Advocacy Services, reviewing our first annual report. The irony of keeping Owen's name wasn't lost on me. It served as a daily reminder that survival could be transformed into purpose. The insurance settlement and recovered assets had provided me with more than financial security. They'd given me the resources to build something meaningful from the wreckage of my former life. Our advocacy service specialized in helping victims of insurance fraud and medical manipulation, providing both legal support and emotional guidance for people who'd been betrayed by those they trusted most. Pippa, Karen Miller said, settling into her chair across from me. The Portland office just closed their 15th case this month. The victim was a construction worker whose accident followed the exact same pattern as your case: suspicious driver, mysterious debt relief, coordinated legal representation. Karen had left our former marketing firm to become my business partner, bringing her skills in client relations and strategic planning to our growing operation. Together, we'd built a network that now operated in 5 states, working directly with law enforcement agencies to identify and prosecute insurance fraud conspiracies. The consequences of Owen's case had rippled far beyond his individual conviction. Federal legislation had been passed requiring enhanced oversight of personal injury settlements, particularly in cases involving permanent disabilities. Insurance companies had implemented new protocols for detecting fraudulent claims, and medical licensing boards had tightened regulations for competency evaluations. Detective Collins, now Captain Collins, visited regularly to update me on related cases that had emerged from the investigation. The network you helped us uncover has led to 47 additional arrests across 6 states, she reported during her latest visit. Your courage to fight back probably saved dozens of lives. The personal transformation had been more complex than the professional success. Learning to navigate the world in a wheelchair had required physical adaptation, but learning to trust people again had demanded emotional reconstruction that was still ongoing. Shelby Martinez had relocated to Chicago to become our head of investigation, bringing her private detective skills to bear on cases that reminded me daily of how close I'd come to becoming just another victim statistic. Her friendship had been crucial during the dark months when the full weight of Owen's betrayal threatened to overwhelm my determination to rebuild. The most unexpected source of healing had come from connecting with Owen's other victims: Sarah Chen from Portland, Michael Torres from Phoenix, and 15 others who'd survived the network's orchestrated accidents had formed an informal support group that met monthly via video conference. Seeing how you fought back gave the rest of us permission to stop seeing ourselves as victims, Sarah had told me during our most recent call. You showed us that survival could become strength. But perhaps the most meaningful consequence was the letter I'd received from Andrew Lawson, the young attorney who'd risked his career to expose Graham's document falsification. He'd completed his law degree and joined the prosecutor's office, specializing in cases involving professional misconduct and conspiracy. Your case taught me that practicing law means more than following procedures, he'd written. Sometimes it means choosing between career advancement and moral obligation. Thank you for showing me how to make that choice. The physical limitations Owen had tried to use as weapons against me had become sources of unexpected strength. The wheelchair that was supposed to symbolize my helplessness had become a visible reminder that true power came from mental resilience, not physical capability. Late in the evening, after reviewing the day's case files, I often found myself thinking about Owen in his prison cell. The man who'd calculated my destruction with such precision was now living a life measured by routine and restriction. He'd traded his freedom for money he never got to spend, destroying his own future in his attempt to control mine. The ultimate irony was that Owen's scheme had achieved exactly the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of leaving me financially dependent and socially isolated, his betrayal had led to financial independence and a network of relationships built on genuine trust and shared purpose. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't just about punishment, it was about transformation. Owen's attempt to write my ending had instead given me the opportunity to author my own beginning. 3 years have passed since I gave Graham Thorne the evidence that shocked everyone, not just the recording of Owen's confession, but a comprehensive file documenting the entire conspiracy that had destroyed so many lives. The moment I handed that evidence to federal agents marked not just the end of Owen's scheme, but the beginning of my own rebirth. This morning, I received a letter that would have seemed impossible during those dark days in the rehabilitation center. The Department of Justice had awarded Richardson Advocacy Services a federal contract to develop training programs for law enforcement agencies investigating insurance fraud. Our work had become the national model for identifying and prosecuting these sophisticated conspiracies. The girl who once lay in a hospital bed, listening to her husband plan her death, had become the woman testifying before Congress about victim rights and corporate accountability. Owen's attempt to silence me had instead amplified my voice in ways he never could have imagined. Mrs. Richardson, the committee chairman had said during my testimony last month, your case has fundamentally changed how we approach these crimes. You've transformed personal tragedy into systemic reform. But the most profound transformation was personal. The trust Owen shattered had been rebuilt through relationships forged in truth rather than convenience. Shelby, Karen, Detective Collins, even Carrie, Owen's own sister who'd chosen justice over family loyalty, had shown me that betrayal by one person didn't negate the possibility of integrity in others. The wheelchair I'd initially seen as a symbol of everything I'd lost had become a reminder of everything I'd gained. Strength doesn't come from what happens to you. It comes from what you choose to do with what happens to you. Tonight, as I review case files for tomorrow's client meetings, I think about the words I'd spoken to Owen during his confession. You set yourself up. He'd tried to orchestrate my destruction, but had only succeeded in revealing the depth of my resilience. Owen Richardson thought he was writing my ending. Instead, he gave me the most powerful beginning I could have ever imagined. And that beginning continues every single day. Alia Turabiliak, Oa Turabilia Turabilia. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.